May thy knife chip and shatter, Dune Part 2 is finally here after the delays and Part 1's inconclusive ending that left us hanging for 3 years. Of course, the hype around this film is seemingly insurmountably high, seeing as it is an adaptation of probably the most renowned science fiction novel ever made. And then on top of that, you have Denis Villeneuve at the helm, one of the best filmmakers to come out of the 21st century. Now, there's rarely such a thing as a perfect adaptation. In the case of the first film, I did have my reservations. Many great aspects of Frank Herbert's novel were omitted, making for what I felt to be a less compelling story. There was less characterization and almost an absence of that foreboding tonality that encompassed the first half of the book. There was no dinner party. Leto, Thufir, Yue, and even Gurney, one of my favorite characters, all felt a bit less dimensional. And to me, most of this could have been solved with more runtime. Perhaps another 30 to 40 minutes, which might sound a bit silly to those who found the first part boring, but if you've read the book, you're likely to find that the film is more abridged than you would prefer. Needless to say, I don't fault Denis for this all that much, as negotiating the length and budget of such a film must be a pretty arduous process. I can only wonder how things might have turned out if Oppenheimer had come out sooner, proving to studios that you can get people to watch longer movies, but now we're here with Part 2, which is 10 minutes longer and, dare I say, a significant step up from the first. For starters, this is a gigantic visual spectacle that cinema only produces once in a blue moon. This is genuinely one of the best IMAX experiences that I've ever had, and that's in part thanks to Greg Fraser with his best work as a cinematographer to date. This is how you make the most out of the format. It is a technical masterpiece with some of the most striking imagery ever brought to the genre of science fiction. And although some will resent the minimalist approach, to me the visual effects and set design are some of the best that I have seen in years. From the towering and awe-inspiring architecture to the inconceivably large worms, I can't get enough of it. The sound design is an even bigger improvement upon the first as well. Even the fight choreography here stands out amongst many modern films. And for these reasons alone, this film is a must-see, ideally in IMAX. The sequences on Getty Prime are daring and menacing with brilliant gothic futurism. On Arrakis, there is a scene in particular that involves Timothée Chalamet and a worm, which on its own warrants a ticket to this movie. But yeah, it's ultimately a given that a film directed by Denis would meet these expectations. So what about the script? Generally, some of the qualms that I had with Part 1 still carry over into this film, but to a much lesser extent, and in such a way that I can be more forgiving of. This is because the second half of the book works better with Denis' vision and the film's pacing. In fact, the pacing is near perfect compared to Part 1, not a minute of runtime feels wasted. There are some omissions from the book that I would have liked to see, but there are also welcome changes that elevate the film. For instance, Zendaya's character Chani is more skeptical and less malleable than her book counterpart, which brought extra emotional conflict to an otherwise limited element of the book. Stilgar, played brilliantly by Javier Bardem, is more lighthearted in this adaptation, which added some satisfying tonal contrast without impeding on the essence of the film. The absence of a few characters that I won't name so as to not spoil the book were actually choices that I think were appropriate for the direction that this film decides to go. Of course, with an adaptation like this, you can't have everything. As for Paul, I will say that his arc is less gradual and at times slightly contrived in comparison to the source material, but this is made up for with what I think might be Timothée Chalamet's best performance, although there are still a few films of his that I have yet to see. Regardless, he perfectly encapsulates the volatility of Paul and the ambiguity of his intentions. This character is meant to toe a thin moral line, and for that reason it requires a performance with substantial range. There are moments when Chalamet radiates an inviting and modest energy, and then there are moments where he commands the scene with a grand but disconcerting presence. He facilitates the Machiavellian themes of Dune through this phenomenal performance that I think he should be nominated for. After seeing this film, I understand why Denis wouldn't make this without Chalamet as the lead. He is Paul. This is a career-defining role. I also know many people are talking about Austin Butler as Fade Rotha, and yeah, he's amazing. I don't think he's necessarily comparable to Heath Ledger's Joker, as some would have you believe, but he serves the film perfectly and does a great job of embodying this character. In terms of how other characters were adapted, I was a bit underwhelmed by the reduction of Skarsgård's Baron being less cunning and mischievous despite his perfect casting and performance. Jessica, while perfectly depicted by the great Rebecca Ferguson, is slightly more one note in the script. I think this is another instance where more runtime would have been ideal. As much time is allocated to world building and politics in Herbert's Dune, there is always methodical attention to the development of the characters within the story. There is a subtle bleakness to the slow transformation of Paul's character that crescendos into a gutting climax, which is a core aspect that is almost recreated in this film. I say almost because, again, I don't think these two films perfectly execute, but this one does come pretty damn close. I think if anything, part 2 is hindered by the clunkiness of the first film, which is why I commend Chalamet for how he salvaged the underwritten areas of the script. Ultimately, I think these films are just missing a bit of the emotional poignancy. As much as I love the ginormous visuals and Hans Zimmer's slightly overbearing score, I never expected these films to manifest exactly what I had in mind when reading the book, but I do think it is worth mentioning the hiccups along with the improvements. I think we're living in the good timeline where the one director that could get as close to Herbert's vision is the one helming the adaptation. It's mostly faithful, and at the end of the day, it is an interpretation. It should be treated as such. Dune Part 2 is still thematically rich, and it has a perfect balance of subtlety and grand scale. We're now starting to see what films will define the 2020s, and this one will likely be etched in cinema history. So go see this on the best IMAX screen that you can. And obviously, I highly recommend you read the book if you haven't already. I'll definitely be seeing this one again soon, and after a couple rewatches, I'm sure the omissions won't really bother me anymore. So let me know how you felt about Dune Part 2 in the comments, and since you made it to the end of the video, you might as well leave a like and you might as well subscribe. You can follow me on other platforms linked in the description below, but yeah, thanks for watching.